Thanks for joining Action News 5 to 10. I'm Joy Redman. An FBI operation ended in dozens arrested, including police officers, sheriff's deputies, and 2 sheriffs.
Two church leaders with ties to Tampa are facing federal charges tonight. They're at the center of what investigators are calling a multi-million-dollar conspiracy involved.
I'm telling you about this Minnesota fraud scheme. They took all this COVID money and just wasted it. Politicians knew about it. There was no real investigation.
Happening right now, the illusion of untouchable political power in the American Midwest has just been shattered by the deafening crack of a federal battering ram. We are here today to announce the dismantling of the ultimate political shield, a multi-billion-dollar cover-up engineered not by street-level criminals, but by the very elites trusted to govern. While the rest of the country slept, a convoy of armored federal vehicles moved silently, without headlights, down a private, tree-lined avenue in one of the most exclusive gated communities overlooking Lake Minnetonka. This wasn't a raid on a warehouse, a clinic, or a gritty urban shadow bank. This was a direct strike on a sprawling $22 million waterfront estate. For years, the iron gates of this compound represented a fortress of legal immunity, a place where state policy was sold to the highest bidder over glasses of expensive scotch. But as 80 heavily armed agents from the FBI's hostage rescue team, the DEA, and IRS criminal investigation poured over the limestone walls, that immunity evaporated. This morning, the federal government didn't just arrest a man. They severed the head of the political serpent that had been protecting a $2 billion transnational fraud empire. To understand the magnitude of what federal agents found inside that compound, you have to understand the man who owned it. Power broker and elite lobbyist Arthur Vance was not a cartel boss in the traditional sense. He didn't move narcotics, and he didn't manage the money mules flying silver suitcases to Dubai. Vance traded in a much more dangerous currency: political protection. For over a decade, Vance served as the invisible architect of a shadow state, using his unparalleled influence to build a regulatory fortress around the Somali fraud networks that were systematically draining the heartland of its wealth. He was the fixer. When local auditors started asking questions about millions of dollars disappearing into fake daycare centers and phantom housing projects, it was Vance who made the phone calls to kill the investigations. When law enforcement got too close to the St. Cloud shadow banks, it was Vance who quietly arranged for the lead investigators to be reassigned or discredited. He weaponized the bureaucracy of the state against its own citizens, turning oversight committees into blindfolds and transforming public offices into extensions of a criminal enterprise. The tactical breach of the Vance estate was a masterpiece of overwhelming federal force, designed specifically to prevent the destruction of digital evidence. As the front doors were blown off their hinges, specialized cyber warfare units bypassed the home's elite private security detail and sprinted directly for the basement. They weren't looking for cache walls or vacuum-sealed bricks of fentanyl. They were hunting for the black servers, the off-grid data centers that housed the true accounting of the Midwest's political corruption. What they found, hidden behind a biometric vault door beneath the estate's wine cellar, was a digital citadel. Row upon row of encrypted servers pulsed in the cold, climate-controlled air. These servers didn't just contain financial ledgers. They contained the operational DNA of a $2 billion cover-up. As forensic accountants and cyber experts began the agonizing process of decrypting the drives, the sheer scale of the treason began to materialize on their monitors. The $500 million property fraud ring in St. Cloud and the billion-dollar money mule flights out of the airport were not isolated incidents. They were highly synchronized revenue streams feeding into a massive laundering apparatus designed by Vance himself. The digital trail revealed a staggering web of offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, Belize, and the Isle of Man. But the money didn't just sit offshore. Vance had engineered a system where the stolen taxpayer funds, money meant to feed hungry children and provide housing for the vulnerable, were funneled back into the United States disguised as anonymous donations to powerful political action committees. This was the ultimate betrayal. The criminals weren't just stealing the money, they were using the stolen money to buy the politicians who wrote the laws. The ledgers found inside the compound detailed a terrifying payroll of corruption. State senators, influential judges, and high-ranking border officials were receiving massive, untraceable campaign contributions and consulting fees routed through Vance's network. In exchange, these public servants ensured that the cartel's logistics hubs operated with total impunity. They authored legislation that intentionally created loopholes for the shadow banks. They appointed sympathetic judges who would grant leniency to any couriers who were accidentally caught. Vance had created a closed-loop system where the criminals funded the lawmakers, and the lawmakers protected the criminals. It was a hostile takeover of the democratic process, funded entirely by the victims of the fraud. The physical search of the sprawling Minnetonka estate yielded discoveries that sickened even the most hardened federal agents. The sheer opulence of the compound was a testament to the profitability of treason. Agents walked through rooms adorned with priceless imported art, garage bays filled with fleets of European hypercars, and a private marina housing a yacht registered to a shell corporation tied directly to the Sinaloa cartel's financial wing. In Vance's primary office, investigators found a hidden compartment containing physical dossiers on dozens of honest journalists, whistleblowers, and law enforcement officers who had tried to expose the network over the years. These files contained illegally obtained tax records, photographs of their children, and detailed blackmail strategies designed to destroy their lives if they ever spoke out. The shadow state didn't just buy silence, it enforced it through psychological terror. But the most damning piece of physical evidence was discovered in a leather-bound notebook sitting casually on Vance's mahogany desk. It was an executive summary of Operation Clean Slate, a terrifyingly detailed proposal outlining a plan to fully integrate the cartel's illicit funds into the state's legitimate infrastructure grid. Vance was actively negotiating contracts to use the laundered billion-dollar funds to purchase municipal water rights, local energy grids, and regional transit authorities through privatized shell companies. The plan was in its final stages. If the federal task force had waited even 6 more months, the cartel wouldn't just be operating in the state, they would own the fundamental utilities required for the state to function. The Heartland was on the verge of becoming a wholly owned subsidiary of a transnational criminal syndicate, all facilitated by a man wearing a tailored suit and a smiling political mask. The arrogance of the elite is always their ultimate downfall. When federal agents finally pulled Arthur Vance from his master bedroom, he didn't panic. He didn't resist. He simply straightened his silk robe and told the arresting officers that they were making a career-ending mistake. He demanded his phone, promising that he could make one call to Washington and have the entire raid called off before the sun came up. He truly believed that the political shield he had built was impenetrable. He believed that the millions he had funneled into the campaign coffers of the powerful made him a god among men. But as the handcuffs clicked securely around his wrists and he was led out into the freezing Minnesota morning, the reality of his situation finally began to set in. The federal agents surrounding him weren't local cops who could be bought, and the warrant they held was signed by a federal judge outside of his corrupted sphere of influence. For the first time in his life, the fixer was completely out of options. The fallout from the raid on the elite compound has sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of power across the country. By mid-morning, panic had gripped the state capitol as news of the seized black servers began to leak to the press. Politicians who had long championed the fraudulent nonprofits and vehemently defended the corrupted agencies suddenly vanished from the public eye, their offices issuing panicked no-comment statements while frantically consulting defense attorneys. The federal task force immediately froze over $2 billion in associated assets, triggering a cascade of secondary raids on high-end lobbying firms, luxury downtown penthouses, and private wealth management banks that had facilitated Vance's laundering schemes. The untouchables were finally being touched, and the invisible architecture of their treason was being dragged out into the blinding light of federal scrutiny. This operation represents a monumental shift in how the war against transnational organized crime must be fought. The cartels have evolved. They no longer rely solely on sicarios and street-level violence to conquer territory. They have realized that the most efficient way to conquer an American city is to buy the people running it. They weaponize our open financial systems, exploit our charitable grant programs, and feast upon the greed of our political elite. The $2 billion stolen through these fraud rings didn't just vanish into the ether. It was actively used to subvert the rule of law and transform a vibrant region into a safe haven for global criminality. The victims are not abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. The victims are the taxpayers who bled for every dollar that was stolen. The victims are the honest families who watched their communities decay, while the architects of that decay drank champagne on their waterfront estates. If you are still watching this, you understand that the battle for the soul of the heartland is not a conspiracy theory. It is a tactical reality playing out right now in the quiet suburbs and elite gated communities of this country. The raid on the Vance compound proves that no matter how much money they steal, and no matter how many politicians they buy, the shadow state can be broken. But it requires an unrelenting demand for accountability. It requires citizens who refuse to look away when the uncomfortable truths are exposed. Hit that like button right now to force this investigation into the feeds of millions who are still being lied to by the mainstream narrative. Comment the word "expose" below if you believe that every single politician whose name is found on those encrypted servers should face trial for treason, regardless of their title or their wealth. Power thrives in the dark. It relies on your apathy, your distraction, and your belief that the system is too rigged to ever be fixed. But today, the system fought back. The iron gates were torn down, the untouchable elites were placed in federal custody, and the multi-billion-dollar shield was shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. This story is a fictionalized dramatization, but the mechanics of political cover-ups, dark money laundering, and elite collusion are the very real strategies used to undermine our nation every single day. We cannot afford to be complacent. The network may have lost its primary architect, but the roots of corruption run deep, and there are always new power brokers waiting in the wings to take his place. This is Military Command. We are the watch on the wall. We will continue to follow the money. We will continue to break down the tactics, and we will never stop hunting the shadows. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never let them operate in silence.